Do you have a GMP 800 truck or SUV? Do you have previous or present transmission failures? Well, do I have the solution for you? In this box is the greatest Chinesium copy of a TrueCool 40K transmission cooler, which will help keep this transmission and possibly the transmission in your truck alive for longer. I'm going to show you how to install it, how to do it what I would say is the most cost-effective way possible. And we're going to move along on this project. So let's get started. I'll show you what's in this beautiful brown box. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. So we're going to be putting the transmission cooler on my silver single cab truck. It finally came in. And no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Guys, this one's from Amazon, but you can get them on eBay. You can get it all over the place. This is a Chinese copy of a TrueCool 40K transmission cooler. The TrueCool 40K is, I mean, if you haven't heard of it before, it's probably the most common transmission cooler upgrade for these trucks. It'll make a huge difference in the transmission operating temperature, keeping it lower and helping the transmission live longer. I really recommend these for anything with a 4L60 in it, but they're absolutely a good idea for anything with a 4L80 also. So enough chit chat. Let me show you what's in here. Like I said, you buy the Chinese copy, you don't get the fancy box. The TrueCool 40K box is much more colorful, much nicer. But this kit does come with everything you need. We've got our hardware in here, a couple nipples, a couple barbs, some nuts, some little universal mounting tabs, hose clamps, and there's even some bolts in here. A piece of hose, and underneath all of that, the cooler itself. And I'll give them credit, like they pack these things up well, and I've put this on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6 of my vehicles now. I've never had a problem out of any of them. They don't leak, knock on wood. I like to paint mine flat black just so they're not as, hey, look at me, behind the grill. And they work. I mean, on average in my vehicles, especially the ones that I've driven a bit before and then after, I see like an average of about 20-degree temperature drop once I install this cooler. And if you're towing heavy or you're making a lot of power, 20 degrees might be the difference between life and death for your transmission. So I'm gonna finish getting everything unboxed here, and we're gonna go over and start getting things set up on the truck. All right, so first things first here, I am still running this thing through the factory transmission cooler in the radiator. I want to take advantage of that. And as I said before, this is an auxiliary cooler. It is not a primary cooler. The water to oil cooler in the radiator tank is your primary transmission cooler. This one is auxiliary. And the way you want to plumb this is you want your transmission fluid to go through the primary cooler in the radiator first. Then come out, go through your auxiliary cooler, come out of the auxiliary cooler, and go back to the transmission. In doing that, one, it'll help your transmission get up to operating temperature in colder climates, because when the oil is colder than the coolant will warm the oil. And that's important because if it gets down, freezing, below freezing temperatures, it's very difficult for your transmission to move fluid efficiently. There is an operating range for that fluid to be in temperature-wise. It's not just as cold as you can possibly get it. So that's when it's cold, but when it's hot, your vehicle is going to do the best it can to maintain that coolant temperature at 210 degrees, which is the factory setting. maybe you put a lower degree temperature thermostat in it and it's only 190 degrees. Either way, your cooling system should be able to keep the coolant at about that temperature. So if your transmission fluid is, let's say, 210 and your coolant is 190, that water to oil cooler is going to pull as much heat as it can off of that transmission fluid. Whatever heat is left in it will then be dissipated through the auxiliary cooler. And not all the way down to ambient temperature, but it will pull more heat off. It will dissipate more heat from that oil and then return it back to the transmission. I have seen people run them the other direction, and it's really not doing you much good that way. If you run your transmission fluid through the auxiliary cooler, then back through the radiator, it's going to be much closer to coolant temperature than it's going to be to ambient temperature. And typically, I mean, I don't know about where you live, but where I live, it usually doesn't get above 100 degrees or so, even in the hottest months. So I would rather try to be closer to that temperature than coolant temperature. Man, that was a lot of talking. I apologize. So first thing here, we're going to get the this little crossbar here is in some trucks it's used to hold the factory auxiliary cooler, which is, it's a tiny little thing. It does help, but it doesn't do much. We're not going to be using that. We are, however, going to save the hardware. We are going to be reusing these two mounting positions. That out of the way, and bring our cooler down here and kind of sort of get it situated where we want it. I like to try to get mine as close as I can right about there. I usually line mine up right about here, and I'll move the camera in a minute to give you a better angle of it. But it's offset slightly to the passenger side. And the reason I do that is to clear my power steering cooler bolt, because that sticks out a little bit from this little A-frame support. And also it makes routing my lines just a little bit easier, the soft lines, the rubber hose. So, third reason also, it makes it easier to get this top bolt mounted. I can drill directly into the A-frame support, thread tap it, and then just run another bolt right in there. And that way I only have to use 2 or 3 of the little brackets they provide. So, let me grab the brackets and we'll start mocking some stuff up a little further. So I've got it mocked in place. You can see here. I like doing it this way. The little brackets that it comes with, they work really nicely. And these brackets are the same thickness as this piece of metal here, this support brace for the hood latch. So I'm able to drill and tap, bolt right to the frame here, use the factory bolt here, and then just a set of bolts here. Factory bolt down here, another nut and bolt here. Nut and bolt, and then drill and tap and use a factory bolt. I don't use the bolts that come with the kit because they are standard. It's a 1/4 20 bolt with a 7/16 head. To me, I want this to be easy to work on if I ever need to. So I want almost everything on this front end is either a 10, a 15, or a 13. So I don't want to have to lug another wrench and another socket around. So now I've got everything here is done with more 10mm bolts and nuts. So I still only need the 10, the 13, and the 15 to take the whole front end apart. So now I'll take it back off. I'm gonna paint the front of the radiator, the front of the core, the condenser, the front of the core support here. I'm gonna get it all painted, nice flat black, how I like. And then I'll get it bolted back up, and then I'll do the plumbing. All right, everybody, she's all painted up, nice and black, pretty camouflaged. Paint's wet. I've got some stuff to go do, so I'm gonna leave it. The paint will cure, and then when I get back in a few hours, I'll be able to finish the plumbing. I'll show you how I do it. I try to keep it neat and tidy and not an eyesore. Again, I want this to look like it was there from the factory. So yeah, when I get back, we'll do that. I'll see you in a little while. Well, it's next evening, folks. I wound up not making it back down here yesterday evening, but we're gonna get it wrapped up today because there's really, the plumbing on this is super simple. So I've got these are factory lines for an auxiliary cooler. And the way I'm gonna plumb this, the nice thing about these factory lines is they have this little ear on it, and it's meant for a push-in style connection, but that also works really well just as a push-over connection with a piece of rubber hose. Slip the hose over, put your clamp on this side, you're good to go. And the way that I like to do these to plumb them in to try to keep it looking clean is really, it's super duper simple. So I'll put my hose over this end of the factory line, and then behind the cooler here, I'm just gonna let it loop around, basically do a loop. So it'll go swoop, and then hook right back up to this nipple here. And I'll have a clamp here, easy peasy. The same thing on this side, connect, swoop up, around, and connect. Easy peasy. I can't do it while I'm holding the camera, so I'm gonna grab my clamps and I'll show you. All right, guys, so I've got my piece of hose that was supplied with the kit. I haven't cut it. I'll cut it once I have it where I want it. I've got one clamp here on my hard line, my factory hard line. I've got one clamp slipped down over my hose, and you may notice these are not worm screw style clamps, the type you tighten up with a screwdriver. These are actually spring clamps, and they're factory application clamps. I get them off of these trucks from something that I eliminate in about 98% of them. Who recognizes this? This is where the clamps come from. Who knows what this little piece of hose is from? Put it in the comments. Last chance. This is your factory throttle body heater line. So from the factory, these Gen 3 V8s, the steam port that comes out of the front of the driver's side head, this little hose connects that steam port to the throttle body, and then there's another hose that connects from the throttle body to the radiator. And these allow the steam and air that is trapped up at the top of the cooling system to be pushed through to the radiator. And once it's all pushed through, these allow coolant to flow through the throttle body to help warm it up in the winter time. GM did this for drivability. It really would only ever make a difference if you did a lot of jump in, flick the key, and drive in a vehicle that you're driving in extremely cold climates. I mean, I'm in Pennsylvania. This is absolutely not necessary around Pennsylvania. Our winters do not reach that type of temperatures. So I eliminate these on all of my vehicles, but I keep the clamps because I prefer spring clamps. I do not like those worm screw style clamps because they don't adjust as whatever it is you're working on heat cycles. It's a teeny minuscule amount but every time this cooler gets hot and cools down again, this brass nipple is going to expand as it warms up and contract as it cools off. And it does that every heat cycle, and the spring clamp keeps a nice tight grip on that nipple throughout that heat cycle. And same with all your other hoses and lines. So I prefer to use spring clamps. Stick it right up on there. And one modification I do make for these spring clamps, I'll show you here in a second. If I can successfully operate the pliers. Which, you know, guys, cut me some slack. Pliers can be challenging. We're coming up, we're coming up, we're coming up, we're coming up. Right there. That's where I want it, right there. I do make one small modification to these little clamps before I use them. But can you see how this ear has this little tab sticking out? And that's basically supposed to be to limit how far open you can squeeze that clamp. I just use my pliers and squish that little tab down like so. And that allows me to open this clamp up enough to get it on a 3/8 hose. So now I can make a loop. I don't want kinks. I want to try to keep this as short, but also as kink-free as possible. And I think there will work. Is that roughly half my length? Yep, pretty much. I forgot my knife, of course. I can make a little mark. Okay, kinda. I'll go with a nice sharp razor blade here to make a nice clean cut. Ta-da! Now, we'll loop around, poke over. Well, wait. First, we'll get it on the right side. Now we'll loop around, poke over. There we go. Pliers, squeeze my clamp, one little clamp. You can do it. Guys, I'm right at the limit of what this clamp is capable of. So it can be a little tricky. Now we're going. There we go. Now we're clamped. Tuck it right up behind. Just like so. There we go. No longer need these little factory retainers. So we can snip those off. Now I do the same thing on the other hose. Make a nice loopy swoop, connect them up, good to go. Guys, the other thing here just to keep in mind is there is not a ton of pressure in these lines. There's almost no restriction in this circuit. You need restriction to create pressure. So this is really a pretty free-flowing setup, pretty free-flowing part of the system. So you don't need to be worried about like, oh, if I don't put worm clamps on there and tighten them down to the moon, it's gonna blow my transmission cooler lines off. No, that's not the case. There's very little pressure in this portion. It's just the cooler. So you don't need to have worm clamps on here and tighten them to the moon. These little worm clamps are how I've done quite a few vehicles this way. Never had a problem. Yeah. So this guy, we want to loop it around and poke him down. There we go. Work this clamp on there. There we go. Now she's done. Oh yeah. Now she's done. Yeah. Stick this behind. Peek down and look from here. I don't have anything rubbing or any contact issues. Happy with how my lines look. Very compact. I'll get a little black paint, spritz those, and then happy, happy, happy with this. And there we have it. Transmission cooler installed. And guys, like I said, like this is just a Chinese knockoff of a TrueCool 40K transmission cooler that I ordered on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. I think it's like $59 and you get the whole kit like I showed you. Came with the mounting brackets. The only thing I used that wasn't the kit is the clamps and the bolts, but you could use the stuff that came with it and be just fine. This is just my OCD personal preference. So I love these things. I mean, I can't remember if I said it before or not, but the trucks, my other trucks that I've run this same exact cooler in, it drops the transmission temperature by 20 degrees over the factory setup with a factory auxiliary cooler. So it makes a substantial difference. We've dramatically increased the amount of power that we're putting through this 4L60. We did make some changes to the 4L60 to help it handle that power, but I've said it in so many of my videos, if you want your transmission to last, you gotta keep it cool. And these coolers do that, hands down. So that's it on this one, folks. Now you've seen how I do it. If you wanna do it yourself, order yourself a kit, go down in the description, you'll find the link. I don't make anything off of it. I just like sharing products that I believe in. And yeah, I hope this helps you. Thanks a lot for watching. Till the next video, everybody, take care.